conversation, one I've been looking forward to for a very long time with Warhamster Brady.
It took us a while to get here, but I think it was important. It was really important to set up the backdrop to the Fabian Society, and all the philosophical, economic underpinnings behind how they developed this. What I'm going to prove today that it's actually a cult. Fabian Socialism is a cult. It is a depopulationist death cult in many ways, but it is atheistic without it. But we're going to go through all that today. And as promised, we are finally going to get into the Fabians. I had a couple of fun little memes I wanted to share. Oops, that's the wrong one. Hang on. As I was doing my research, I run into all kinds of fun stuff, as you can imagine.
Absolutely.
Let's see which one we're going to. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. The fact that the catchphrase is tax the rich and not help the poor is telling. That's because it's an ideology premised on envy and resentment tone. The altruism is merely performative. Isn't that what we've been saying for years?
Yes.
They hide behind the fake veneer of charity and altruism.
Yes.
So I thought that was good. Also found a really fun quote from, did that second one pull up?
I think I have to take that down. No, it's still just that one.
Okay, I got to share it each one. It's okay. I'll be quick.
Okay.
The great Pat Buchanan spoke on this issue of socialism. He says, why is this happening? Socialism, the beatific vision of European intellectuals for generations, is one reason. If everyone has the promise of a state pension, children are no longer a vital insurance policy against want in old age. Says, argues Dr. John Wallace of Bologna's Johns Hopkins University. Says, if women can earn more than enough to be financially independent, a husband is no longer essential. And if you can also have sex and not babies, and this seems to be true now of Catholic Italy, as it is of secular Britain, why marry? By freeing husbands, wives, and children of family responsibilities, European socialists have eliminated the need for families. That's from Pat Buchanan's Death of the West, written in 2002. We're going to go through where all those ideologies came from. And it is an atheistic death cult. So I thought it was cool finding that. I've got to go read that book by Pat Buchanan. You know, he's aged very well, some of the stuff that he said.
Yes.
And that's not true the case for most of the politicians of his era. They've aged rather poorly. Okay. Books where sources were seized. I thought I'd give everyone a quick little reading list. And that's what I'll do is share here. First book that we've heard us both talk about, and the Colonel has completed this book, or almost, is The Fabian Freeway, The High Road to Socialism in the U.S. by Rose L. Martin. This was published in 1966, and everything that she said is true to this day. This is, Colonel, tell everyone why we're doing Fabian Socialists, why this is so darn important.
Because if you look at the background of, and again, we're going to talk briefly at the beginning of the mid 1800s. And of course, we talked at length about the entire 1800s, starting with the Skull and Bones addition to the death cult. And what is most interesting about how these ideas bubbled up is the terminology that was used in the 1800s is the exact same terminology that you are hearing today. The open society, that was coined in the late 1800s. The use of the word democratic was coined back then as well. And that's why they adopted the wolf in sheep's clothing, because they burrow, or like a parasite, feed off of existing entities by hollowing them out and controlling them from the inside, whether it's civil service or the judiciary or your political parties, the executive branch. And as we walk through the Fabian Society, you're going to learn to identify particular schools that they infiltrated, particular movements that they infiltrated. And it's, again, it's like having a tune-up on your Gladio glasses because it brings everything into, and their focus on economics. It brings everything into focus.
It's basically what she's describing is the long, slow walk through the institutions, which is the foundational principle of the Fabian Socialists. By contrast, the Marxist school of thought was immediate violent revolution now. And the Fabians wanted the gradualistic approach as they incrementally take over all of our institutions or create new ones. And we're going to go through where that stuff came from. And it's made it 140 years later. We're living through it today. You're about to see the birth of the woke cult.
But understand that the Fabians, while they chose gradualism as their method, they walk hand in hand with the revolutionaries because the end state is exactly the same. The Fabians make very clear that they know socialism leads to communism. And so while they are marching on their highway, the parallel highway of communism has a lot of entrance and exit ramps.
Very good. Okay, the rest of the reading list. I'm going to put that up there. The foundational text was a series of essays called Fabian Essays in Socialism, and it was first published in 1889. You got essays by everyone from Shaw, Webb, Wallace, Olivier, Bland, all defining the Fabian theory. We'll go through a little bit of that today, but not too much. It's also an ongoing series called Fabian Tracts, which is a pamphlet series. There are up to 542 of them that disseminates Fabian ideas to the public and policymakers. This is basically a living think tank. It's been going on. And if you really want to understand just how powerful these ideas are, right now, the entire Fabian Society, there are about 6,500 members, period. They have an annual budget of about 800,000 pounds in British, and they only employ 16 people. Yet this small organization, based on all these ideas, is permeating its way through every single aspect of society. And they do influence with these pamphlets.
And I want to emphasize the use of the word tracts. The reason, and it goes to Brady's main point of it being a cult. They recognized how dedicated people were to their religions. And if you understand the Christian religion, throughout the history of the Christian religion, they have produced tracts. You remember used to not just the one particular church would go around and hand out tracts. They would be at state fairs. And they were just literature that was written about Jesus and some of the fundamental biblical stories in tracts. And they conscientiously labeled the Fabian documents tracts to make them more readily insertable into people's reading, because Christians were already accustomed to producing these tracts.
And a lot of these early Fabians would go around not just Europe, but the United States as well, and give a series of lectures, mostly academic settings and stuff like that. And they would hand out their pamphlets. This is how they spread, their holy word of the woke death cult. I think that's where you settle on that woke death cult.
Okay.
Population is west. Yeah, we'll get there. Another important work was Industrial Democracy. That was written by husband and wife, two of the real key founders, Sidney and Beatrice Webb. which is a big study on trade union organization and collective bargaining. Well, why is that so damn important? Because the unions are one of the foundational pieces of this entire labor movement. And the Fabians would then go on to found the Labour Party in England, which is currently in power, and they have their prime minister is a Fabian.
Yes.
So, it's another really good one called The Cooperative Movement in Great Britain by Beatrice Webb. Also, it's a systematic analysis of cooperative economics, as the Colonel said. And again, we tie this down to the basic economic system is you've got a free market capitalist system where government only exists to preserve your God-given natural rights. And then you have everything else where the government, you start getting centralized controlled government. And that's a slippery slope to communism or, global communism. Eventually you get 100% government making all the decisions, which will fail every single time because without a free market, you don't have a pricing structure. And the only way to find pricing is the amount you or I are willing to pay for a good. If the government's deciding how much to make of something, you'll always either make too much or too little. And that's just that you get feast or famine, and it is inevitable. And I don't care how smart the AI gets, it'll never be as smart as people making their own decisions on what to buy or not buy. And you have to have your fundamental God-given natural right freedoms to do that. If the government doesn't give you your rights, it's there to preserve them. These people think completely differently. And the big book that we're going to go to today, I kind of got to go through the outline. That's kind of the chronological order we're going to go, was The History of the Fabian Society by Edward Peace. And it's basically the primary source written by a Fabian of what the Fabians are all about up to 1916, which is, of course, in the middle of World War I. When we get to that point, we're going to jump across the pond and talk about how Fabians got to America and our good buddy Woodrow Wilson. And there was a more recent one called New Fabian Essays by a guy named Crossman. It was just an updated assessment of Fabianism for the post-war era and very predictive a bit of. So these are all where all the literature is coming from. Happy reading. Oh, and that whole list that's put together, I've talked to the Colonel a bit about this. My company's putting together a basically research agents for different verticals in business, but they built one for me to do the research on this stuff, and I'm about a week away from showing you the output of that. But you're going to be blown away of how we're able to take advantage of AI and expedite the entire research process and give a really good-looking finished product, much better than the Miro boards I've been doing. So that's probably a week away.
Cool. That's exciting.
Yeah. But again, like any other tool, it's only as good as the user. AI is completely useless if you don't already know your topic. So, the Fabian Society didn't spring out of thin air. What happened was a year previous, there was a group of intellectuals founded something in 1883 called the Fellowship of New Life. Remember, the Fabian Society was founded in 1884. We'll get to why there's a little bit of a split there because there's a whole bunch of overlap between these two. So with no further ado, let's jump into the Miro board.
And as we're bringing that up, I want to remind the audience of something that we talked about back when we were doing the Skull and Bones and we got to the family of the Roosevelts. And I mentioned that there was a Cornelius Roosevelt because FDR is going to play a pivotal role in this in our future lesson. But Cornelius Roosevelt wrote a document that caused a lot of turmoil in the United States in 1948, because it was basically foundationally advocating for socialism. And he was ostracized at the time for writing this paper. But just to hit home the points that Warhamster has already made, in the 1800s, the discussion of socialism was not unique to the Fabians. It had already been being discussed for a few decades before they formed. But I wanted to give you this quote that was one of Cornelius Roosevelt's famous quotes. "Economy is my doctrine at all times. And that really hits home. He goes on to be a banker. He was running the Chemical Bank of New York, which we all know today through a bunch of mergers as Chase Bank, along with a whole bunch of other banks. But these were very moneyed people talking about how we were too stupid to run our own lives, and they need to be the planners.
Yeah, we'll have to go into more detail about how Chase Bank came to be what it is today. That's a really fun story with a lot of fun set of stories, but that's off top. I won't go into that, but thanks for, excellent point. All right, so we got the sheep and wolf clothing shield they originally had, but that got bad publicity. So they got the turtle. Tortoise often wins the race, slow and steady. And I found this wonderful picture of the wolf in sheep's clothing here. Very menacing. Okay, but we're at the Society of the New Life. And it is founded by a gentleman by the name of Thomas Davidson. There we go. Center him. Thomas Davidson was born in 1840, lived to 60 years. He died in 1900. He was known as a philosopher and a mystic. Remember when I said it was a cult?
Mm-hmm.
He would actually move to the U.S. in 1867. Would end up settling in St. Louis and worked in education, which I find fascinating because it's a decade after Horace Mann brought the Prussian education system to the Northeast.
Right.
And where they've been indoctrinating our children in public education ever since, which is a core tenet of the Fabian Society.
Yes.
He would end up working in New York City at what's called the New York Round Table, and for that's a publication. And there's another publication called the Western Educational Monthly. So Mr. Davidson's over here in the 1860s indoctrinating American youth. 1875, he moves to Cambridge, Massachusetts, becomes a linguist. He's fluent in French, German, Italian, Spanish, Greek, Latin, and Arabic, which is as well as English. So that's pretty damn impressive, right?
Yep.
This guy goes over, spent some time in Greece and Rome, was doing a lot of work with the Vatican itself, turned down a couple of positions, mostly scholarly work. But again, that's the religious connection here. Davidson taught a philosophy. I'm going to blow this pronunciation. It's called epirotheism. And here's how he described it. It's a form of pluralistic idealism coupled with stern ethical rigorism. And this is an alternative to traditional faith. It says epirotheism was utterly democratic and perfectionistic. Here's a quote. Each individual has the potential to be a god. Little sound technocratic to you?
Well, it actually goes back to a lot of the crazy, what the devil worshippers, where the reincarnation and you die and you come back, and the more you die and come back, the more closer to the perfect God that you can make yourself. So it dovetails into everything.
So basically it's a satanic, atheistic, woke death cult.
Yeah. You're doing what Brian does. He adds a whole bunch of words to the title.
We're not done yet.
I know.
Okay, so he gets back to England, and you've got these socialites, these new elite people that think they're smarter than everyone else, running around in a little high society. This is post-industrial revolution. Human beings have got a lot more free time on their hands. These are upper middle class, highly educated, overly educated people. But a little bit more, first of all, before I get that, let me finish up with the his epirotheism. It says the true aim of life is not the acquisition of wealth or power, but the perfection of the individual character. Davidson says, we must first reform ourselves before we can hope to reform society. So it gets this group of intellectual elites together. They start meeting like monthly. And they have some core philosophies, and this is from their original 1883 prospectus of the cult of Fellowship of New Life. Quote is, "We, recognizing the evils and miseries of modern society, desire to unite in a crusade against them. We aim at the reconstruction of society on a scientific and truly religious basis." There's your Build Back Better death cult. You got to reconstruct society, you've got to tear it down, right?
Correct. The Phoenix.
Well, that's what the Marxists think, but they instead want to infiltrate it from the inside and basically transmorph it into whatever their vision of the future is. This group of people believes in personal, moral, and spiritual regeneration must come before any political or economic change. It's very similar to Fabian philosophy. The members believe that by perfecting themselves through ethical living, simplicity, education, and spiritual development, they could gradually transform society.
And again, it's spirituality without a God.
They want to become a God.
Correct.
Which is transhumanism.
Yes.
They believe in a simple and pure living, high ethical standards. Reminds you a little bit about the Puritans.
Yes.
Most of the members were vegetarians. Again, this is where the woke cult comes from. With everything we're living through today, came from this. It was not mandatory. It was not mandatory to be a vegetarian, but most of them were.
When you see pictures of them, they look like vegetarians. They look like the left today.
We're going to have some pictures. They rejected materialism and competitive capitalism. How dare you make decisions for yourself?
But let me just say that they lived off of the funds that were generated from it.
Yeah, a lot of these people had, once they get their inheritance or trust funds, all they did was write books and do lectures and socialize. So this cult of New Life, it was short-lived. It didn't last more than a decade, but it acted as an intellectual seedbed for many of the ideas that would later shape the British labor movement, progressive education, and 20th century social reform. So and that's why we're going to go through these members. So I gave you the background on Davidson. Next guy we're going to do is Havelock Ellis. That's his name, Havelock. Born in 1859, lived 80 years to 1939. He was known as a physician, a eugenicist, of course, because we've got to get the depopulation stuff in there, and the Darwinian influence. And of course, his big field of study was human sexuality. Sound like something you hear on a college campus these days?
Yes.
He co-wrote the first medical textbook in English on homosexuality in 1897. Just gonna leave that there. That's what these intellectual elites were talking about. Okay. They want to destroy the family, and homosexuality is a good way to do that. But we're also eugenicists. He would publish works in a variety of sexual practices and inclinations. Havelock Ellis is the pioneer of transgender psychology. Just leaving that hanging there. Where do you think this stuff comes from? It wasn't organic. He was gay, by the way. He had lots of several. One guy was a lifetime partner for later years, but he had a couple of other interesting trysts. He developed notions of narcissism and autoeroticism that were later adopted by psychoanalysis. Can you say hi, Sigmund Freud? Yeah, that's this guy. Would you believe me when I told you he was a pioneer in psychedelic drugs?
Yes, I would.
He wrote about his experience with mescaline. Wrote extensively about that. And he would later serve as the vice president of the Eugenics Society from 1909 to 1912. So this guy checks an awful lot of boxes.
I would say he probably is in the scientific research branch of the CIA. I'm sure they have his picture on the wall there somewhere.
Wouldn't surprise me. But how do you get, that's a pretty darn storied career. And all of that stuff is what it's getting, comes spitting out of the university system today. Any other comments on Havelock? Or we
No.
Okay. Next guy we're going to do is Edward Carpenter, born 1844 to 1929. He was considered a utopian socialist, a poet. A lot of these guys wrote poetry. A philosopher and an anthologist. He was an early activist for gay rights and prison reform. This is pretty much the Democrat Party platform.
Yes. And just
much,
so that you know, a lot of the people that we're going to be talking about, even if we don't mention it, if you do your own research, you're going to find out a lot of them are homosexuals in this movement.
It's true. The ones I'm going through right now are the ones who stayed with this original Church of the New Life, or whatever they call it, and did not join the Fabians. The Fabians, we'll get to how they split off and why in a moment here. But these guys are they're still the philosophical backbone of the movement.
Correct.
He was an advocate for vegetarianism. Of course he was. And he argued that animals have the same natural rights as humans. So animals have the right to life, liberty, and property. He was at Cambridge, and he came under the influence of a Christian socialist theologian named F.D. Maurice, who we could spend more time on. But Christian sociology is kind of a contradiction in terms.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like social democracy. All that stuff comes under the same umbrella, just different twists of this theme to take Christianity and turn it into something different. That's why you hear people like the idiot running for senator in Texas, what's his name, Tallow, whatever.
Yeah.
It's talking about how Christianity is socialist and God is transsexual and all that stuff. It's part of that comes from these sick ideologies.
Correct.
And it was at Cambridge when he first started experimenting with relationships with other men. So after graduation, he gets ordained as a curate in the Church of England. So we have a gay, vegetarian, prison reform, gay rights guy joins the church. Doesn't work out too well for him. He becomes dissatisfied with what he called the hypocrisy of Victorian society, and he leaves the church to become a lecturer. His father dies, he inherits a small fortune, and becomes an intellectual socialite and a writer of essays and poems. He would popularize the phrase simple life. And then he wrote, his most famous work was called Towards Democracy, which was a long poem about quote unquote spiritual democracy. Edward Carpenter, another hero of the woke left.
They love the simple life on their inheritance.
Yeah. So our next hero is a guy by the name of Ernest Rhys. He was Welshman. He was basically known as Davidson's disciple. Yeah, he was following him around like a puppy dog. He's best known for being a founding editor of something called the Everyman's Library, which is a series of affordable classics. He would never join the Fabian Society or the Socialist League, which is another entity that popped up out of these ideologies. He never joined. He stuck with his boy Davidson the whole time. So here we get to the split. Some members of this society, I got to make sure I get the name right, Fellowship of the New Life, split away from this group and to join, we'll start in 1884, the Fabian Society. You find that real quick? Go ahead.
Can I go back? Yeah, I want to go back and add something on Davidson that I had in my notes. So you're going to see this thing come up over and over again as well. Harvard is a hotbed for a lot of this activity, even way back then. So Davidson did a series of presentations at Harvard when he was in the United States. And they also create summer schools. You're going to see this as a reoccurring theme. So when Davidson was in the United States, he participated in a thing called the Concord Summer School of Philosophy. And there's some interesting people that showed up as fellow instructors at Davidson's Concord Summer School of Philosophy. One of them is Amos Bronson Alcott. That's the father of Louisa May Alcott, which we all know, right?
Author of Little Women and Little Men.
Yes, amazing, isn't it? Not coincidental. Also, another one of his fellow instructors that summer was William Torrey Harris, and he is a guy that was notorious for promoting the Hegelian philosophy and promoting the use of the Hegelian dialectic model. And they all had basically talking about state worshiping collectivism. So I just wanted to throw that.
Yeah, that's exactly how these British ideas made their way across the pond. It was through academia. We talk about the dollar princesses. That's how the elites shared their ideas. But, what happens if you're like a Rockefeller or any kind of robber baron and any one of these socialites in America with all this money from the Gilded Ages, and this is during the heart of the Gilded Age, you are spending a lot of your time hobnobbing with these intellectuals. And it's to get a visiting British lecturer to show up at one of your lavish parties, in Newport, Rhode Island. That was like a reason to get people to come.
Yes.
That was the social system back then. Good addition to Davidson. I had my research agent write a couple one-paragraph summaries of pieces, book, The History of the Fabian Society, and about this time period, the foundation. Talks about the sources of Fabian socialism. We've gone over much of this, but he says, piece examines the intellectual climate of the 1880s. It discusses the influence of evolution, Darwin, positivism, which is Comte, Henry George's Progress and Poverty, and we'll have to talk more about Henry George probably next week, but he's the guy who got into this theory called the land value taxation. It's a messed up economic theory. We'll get to it. John Stuart Mill, who we'll get to, Robert Owen, Karl Marx, and the Democratic Federation, Christian Socialism, and especially Thomas Davidson's Ethical Spiritual Fellowship of the New Life. Next chapter talks about the foundations of the society, of Fabian Society. And he describes the preliminary meetings or between the guy by the name we're going to get to. Frank Podmore, Thomas Davidson, and others formed the Fellowship of the New Life, focused on personal ethical living. A splinter group wants more political action and forms the Fabian Society on January 4th, 1884. Podmore is the guy who suggested the name after the Roman general Fabius Maximus, the delayer. And of course, we're going to go through some of the early members. So let's look at some of these early members. This guy is a beauty, Hubert Bland. So he's born 1855 to 1914. He's an author and a journalist. As mentioned, he's one of the founders of the Fabian Society. As a kid, he wanted to attend the Royal Military Academy, and become an officer, but his family didn't have the money. Back then, you still pay to play to get in the military. So he becomes a bank clerk and eventually gets into writing. He was a very big man. He was a pugilist, known for getting in street fights. He also was a womanizer. He would marry a woman by the name, who's also one of the original Fabians, by the name of Elizabeth Nesbit. She had a very good friend who was like her handmaid. And of course, Hubert impregnated her. They ended up adopting those children. He's known for, he had a ton of affairs. This guy was a real character. But he's one of the original Fabians. Edith, his wife, 3 years younger. Well, guess what she did for a living? She wrote children's books. And who's she hanging out with? People that are pushing for homosexuality and all these other lovely Fabian ideals. What do you think she put in her children's books? Think any of that made it to today's society?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So she gets to be the founder of that. She actually named one of her children Fabian.
Of course she did.
He would die at the age of 15, so otherwise we'd have a Fabian Bland running around still to this day. But, well, probably not to this day, but lovely family, the Blands. I don't want to do Podmore yet. Hang on, I skipped one. Okay, I don't have a picture on this guy, but he's important. He's got the name of William Clark, 1852 to 1901. He was known as a social activist. Spent time at Cambridge again. Would go on to become a journalist in London. Then he becomes a foreign correspondent for several American publications. This Fabian socialist specialized in writing about U.S. politics and literature and would go on several lecture tours in the U.S. He would join the Fabians in 1886. These are all just the Fabians that were part of the New Life Society. Okay?
Right.
He was on the Fabian Executive Committee from 1888 to 91, so pretty prominent. And his big issues that he lectured on was, quote, the industrial aspect of socialism, which of course was published in the famous Fabian Essays. Of all those Fabian essays, this is the only article in there that takes on an explicitly Marxist approach. So he was a little philosophically different. He also wrote an early history of the Fabians, which appears in the American edition of the Fabian Essays. He had all his money with a trust that went bankrupt, and he lost all of his investments in 1892, and somehow socialism didn't seem that appealing anymore. So he'd leave the Fabians in 1897. He went to work as a writer for the Daily Chronicle. Check this out. He resigns in 1899 because he supported the Boers in the Second Boer War. Kind of tie that in, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Tried and failed to launch his own periodical called the Progressive Review. That didn't make it, so he ended up writing for the Spectator and the Economist. That's the same Economist that spews all this globalist nonsense to this day. That's supposed to be the go-to periodical for economic analysis.
And what you're going to find out once you get through this Fabian research project is the Economist is a product of the Fabians.
Absolutely. Mr. Clark would die in 1901 at the age of 49 due to a problem with diabetes. No, I don't have a picture of this next guy either for some reason. Okay, this is, well, I already did. Okay, that's right. We do not have the next one. Next guy is a Percival Chubb. Born 1860, lived 99 years. He's one of the founding fathers of Fabians. He was a teacher and a legal aid would later join what's called the Ethical Society, because of course it is. In 1889, he would emigrate to the United States and was a teacher and a lecturer to poison our children's minds. And you got to figure a lot of these guys ended up at some of the grooming schools, because that's what I was trying to keep an eye out for. These Englishmen who came over to teach, did they end up at our favorite grooming schools? And I know some of them did. I haven't found one yet.
Well, but keep in mind, they didn't come over here at the school age level. They came over and embedded themselves in Harvard, Columbia, New York University was a common one. The University of Chicago is another common one. So they're coming over at a little later time, generally.
Yeah, I just know some of them end up teaching at the grooming high schools. But yeah, you're correct. I want to tie that into our skull and bones type stuff, the grooming schools. But there are Fabian connections. I just haven't gotten that place chronologically.
Well, their Fabian connections is from the school. So what you're going to find out is that the Groton and those types of grooming schools hire out of the colleges for the teachers that these guys are embedded in. I've not found one that actually took up a job at those grooming schools, but they're at the teacher colleges that are teaching the teachers at Groton and Xavier and all of those. So there's a direct line to them. It's just not the actual Fabian member that's a part of it in my research so far.
Next guy is a Frank Podmore. He's a fun one. He was born in 1856, lived in 1910. He was an influential member of what's known as the Society for Psychic Research.
Mm-hmm.
He's known for his interest in spiritualism, would end up attacking mediumship. And that really fits this woke leftist mentality. It really does.
Yep.
And you can just see these rich elites just sitting around doing seances. He wrote a book called The New Spiritualism in 1910, where he defended telepathy and the existence of ghosts. He was also a poltergeist evaluator and investigator. Yes, this was one of the original Ghostbusters.
Yes.
Frank Podmore. But he did conclude that most of the poltergeists were explained by deception and trickery. We haven't talked much about theosophy on this show. I know Matt Ehret does a really good job on that. Theosophy is a very, very important philosophical trend of this day and age. It overlaps somewhat with what we're going through. But I bring it up because Podmore was a big skeptic of theosophy. Theosophy was another atheistic, deist type of, I guess that's a broad way of saying philosophy or religion. So he got involved early on. It was he and Edward Peace, who was the historian for the Fabians, the early one. They would join a socialist debating group established by Edith Nesbit and Hubert Bland, and that became the Fabian Society. And of course, it's widely believed that he was homosexual. Now, the next four names are really the powerhouse four of the Fabian Society.
Yep.
We're not going to go too deep into them, but I'll let the Colonel give just a kind of a broad overview of these characters to kind of whet your appetite. And the first two are Beatrice and Sidney Webb, who would get married. And I look at this picture. The Colonel sent me this photo, so I used it. She is an ugly woman.
Yeah.
If I was studying psychic research like Frank Podmore, I would have thought she was a witch.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I found interesting in going through the history of the early Fabians that is made clear in the Fabian Freeway, in the way in which she wrote that book, is almost every one of these people are knighted in some way. They're given some title by the royal family. And I found that, so here you have the Britain, the British Empire, and you have people that, we've had movements in America that the Constitution that was like anti-constitutional. They were never bestowed honors. They were never as part of not that we have the same form of government, but generally they're kind of marginalized and pushed off to the side, and in many cases, especially in the 1800s, ridiculed for the most part, and shunned from the mainstream society. Not these people. These people all were given titles by the royal family, which goes to show, in my opinion, a complete embrace of this. And if you understand kind of the philosophical background of this, what they're doing is they want to get rid of the look of the empire, of the British Empire, because that's going to be going out of vogue, because the slave colonies and all that other stuff. They don't want to actually get rid of the empire. They want to recast the empire into a commonwealth. And in order to do that, you have to infiltrate completely your subordinate colonies so that you can do it invisibly. You own every part of the government, the judges, the civil service, the colleges, but it's going to be an invisible commonwealth. That sounds so much nicer, kind of the wolf in sheep's clothing. And so if you've got this body of people called the Fabians that are going to pull this off while you're pretending that you're dissolving the quote unquote empire, you're not dissolving anything. You have infiltrated the entire empire to include the former colony called America that you want back into the empire. And I think that has to be said up front as we go through this.
And we alluded to that with Cecil Rhodes. One of his things, he always wanted to get, quote unquote, the crown jewel back in the empire. And that's one of the things you're going to see the parallels. They set up all these societies in England, and they have to do it a little differently in America because we're founded totally a lot differently. We don't have, titles of nobility and such, but it's the same in form, especially in the Northeast, where we have our Boston Brahmins and other, New York socialites and all that. The total Ivy League. It's mirrored on this British structure, intellectual structure that's being developed in this 1880s postmodernist world.
Yeah, exactly. So, hold on, let me get back to Webb here. So I also want to point out something I found amazing, because again, we're at a time period in the later 1800s where women are not part of the normal hierarchy. But what you're going to find, even though we've got a whole bunch of homosexuals running around in the Fabian Society, they put a big emphasis on couples of partners working together in this structure. They did it both in Britain and America using couples, one of which you're going to find out is FDR and Eleanor. Eleanor has a huge role in all of this in upcoming sessions. So Sidney Webb was basically what I would consider the true architect of the Fabians Society.
Yeah.
And he started...
Real quick, I'm just cracking up because SR made a comment in the chat. It says, she's a conehead.
It just is so funny. As soon as I saw that picture, I had to send it to War Hamster, because it literally depicts all of the people that I was pulling up and looking for old images of. That is quintessential what they look like. So I had
she's taller. She looks taller than him in this picture too.
Yes, everything about him is just. And if you were to pick out the leftist couples today, it would look just like that.
Another great comment in there is from Banana Walrus Wafer. Says credentialism has been their best friend. Could not agree more. They love to bestow titles upon each other. Yeah, and that's how they got away. If you remember, I'm old enough to remember, during COVID lockdowns where they tried to throw their credentials at us left and right.
Yes.
But it's been peer reviewed, and this hasn't. So therefore, that must be wrong. No, it turns out it was right. So screw your credentialism.
So just a brief overview of Webb. He was a civil servant working in the colonial office. And again, that just is the reason why I said what I had just said, was because it depicts Webb. Webb was one of the true architects of how to infiltrate civil service to run the government without actually ever being in charge of governmental offices. And the colonial office is imperative because the colonial office in Britain at the time managed all of the colonies. They were orchestrating underneath the surface appearance of the British government this wolf in sheep's clothing process in all of their colonial provinces at the time.
These are the modern day technocrats. We see this in Washington, D.C. You see 94% of Washington, D.C. votes Democrat. That's not because they work for Democratic politicians. It's because they work for the government.
Yes.
These are statists. The government is God. You do not challenge our state.
And one of the ways to characterize his fundamental belief is that he viewed society as a machine to be tuned up by experts. He viewed the Fabians as mechanics on a vehicle. That the vehicle could not run without their fine-tuning of the vehicle. He was a proponent of what some people dub administrative socialism, and obviously the gradual accumulation of knowledge and data. They're very, very big on data, very, very big on data. Because the economists that they're training uses those data sets in order to manipulate what they want everything to say, so they can use that as the rationale to go back and fundamentally change the system. It also said that they wanted to take individual decision making away from business owners and dictate that by bureaucratic policy. That's where the regulations and the laws come into play, that they were not going to, in America, be able to actually kind of basically eliminate capitalism, but they felt they could subordinate capitalism to the bureaucracy, which they've done a really good job of. And that's also why their main mechanism in targeting, in addition to education, was unions, because you can control the business by controlling the labor element. They also targeted all of the trade associations. So you have a circle of people from labor to trade associations to bureaucracies in the government that it doesn't matter who actually owns a company. They can control the entire thing from the underneath.
And that's exactly why I pointed out that there's only 6,500 current members of this Fabian Society, but they have an army spread throughout all the layers of bureaucratic government, an absolute army of dedicated little cultists. These people are in a cult. They have been indoctrinated. This is a higher way of thinking. They have elevated themselves from normal humanity. This is what we're up against. And it's an impossible amount of, maybe not impossible, but very difficult amount of brainwashing and indoctrination because it's cradle to grave. They get this stuff. They get it at work. They work for the government. They get it in school, and they get it on TV and social media, and it's hammered into them nonstop. A lot of these wokesters today that we're dealing with, and even these people, these egalitarians, my favorite word from last week, they actually think that they are ethical and doing good. They actually think they're improving society. And they don't understand the fundamental issue is, no, if you're taking away my God-given natural rights, you are not. That your very first act is evil. Anything that springs from it is going to be evil.
Correct.
And more importantly, and just as importantly, ineffective. Because as I said earlier, top-down controlled economies don't work. You need a free market pricing mechanism so people know what to produce and how much of it to produce. The market signals. There's 1 billion people making market decisions every single day in a free market economy, and that gives more information to producers and every step of the whole chain that gets all that information, and it is smarter collectively than every AI will ever be. So, technocrats, yeah. And there's that freedom issue. A couple things in chat real quick. Question about the Tavistock. We are absolutely going to do an entire chapter on the Tavistock Institute because it's a big part of this story. Funny comment from Renee. She said, so the homosexuals did come first? Yeah. We have homosexual globalists. You know that term we see online, globo-homo? Here's where it started.
That's the nickname of the Fabian Society.
Globo-homo?
Okay.
I may have to title this episode Globo-homo now.
And just a couple of words, because we could spend an entire show on Beatrice Webb, but together, Sydney and Beatrice founded the London School of Economics. That's where it came from. And of course, that was to populate the bureaucratic levels, mechanisms with Fabians so that they could infiltrate and control the government. Because I don't know if you saw that one clip about the Fed. They had like over 3,000 economists in the Fed. And all that I've seen, all of the major schools of economics, whether it's Chicago, Harvard, Columbia, Cornell, all have Fabians in them. And today they still have Fabians in them. And they were the targets of the Fabians originally. And that's like dumbfounding to me.
Yeah, and I was an econ major and got this stuff shoved down my throat. And as you can imagine, at a University of California campus, I got kicked out of a lot of lectures for arguing. I was a free market capitalist from way before I ever heard of college. And I know the colonels had a ton of econ education as well.
I minored in it in my bachelor's degree. And what I found interesting is my economics, the one I tried to take most of my classes with in the economics world, I didn't realize at the time, but she supplemented her income by contract. She was a government contractor. And so looking back on it now, I just have to chuckle because there was some things that she said in class that I thought was really weird. I love the fact that she had real world experience and could bring that into the class. But some of the things that she said, I knew, in fact, not to be true. And it's just funny that I'm now realizing why all that was true.
Yeah, my main professor of economics was actually a CCP member. Yeah, they brought him over from China to teach us economics. That was
interesting.
Yeah, and let's not go too deep into the London School of Economics, but one of the things to remember is it's all based on all these models. And models,
data.
Problems with models that need data, and they have to make a bunch of assumptions. And you know what they say about assumptions. And I'll make one last comment about economists. You get 3 economists. They go out hunting. First guy shoots at a bird, misses 5 feet left. Second economist shoots the bird, misses 5 feet right. Third economist says, "Let's go home. We got him." That's economics for you. All right. Our next great founder is, of course, George Bernard Shaw. He's an Irishman. We'll have a lot to say about him next week, but he's also incredibly influential, and we'll do a whole lot of detail. Do you want to add anything on him right now?
Just a very quick overview, just for context, so people can understand his role. He was basically the propaganda machine of the Fabians. He used his wit and public persona to make Fabianism fun, to make it acceptable to the London set dinner club people. And he, in contrast to Webb was very reserved. Webb was very quiet. Shaw was exactly the opposite. Obviously big in the gradualism piece of this, and that he argued that socialists should infiltrate every political party. Now, we already said they created the Labor Party, but it was Shaw that came up with the plan that they would have their plants in all of them, so that they knew everything that was going on in all of the different political parties. And he used dinner parties and stuff like that in order to seed his operatives into, because what he wanted to do more than anything else is to be able to counter ahead of time any push from any of the other political parties that was going to come out. They wanted to pre-position. They had a research element. So they're already writing the narrative to address anything that the political party was going to say ahead of time. And you can argue that looks a lot like our politics today as well. So
the thought that comes to mind, everything they're arguing for is a direct attack on the Constitution, which is limited government. The government is only supposed to, that's one of the big issues is concept of regulation. And if you go look at the original the oldest Webster's dictionary we have in English is from 1828. And the way the dictionary is always written is the most common definition is number one, next most common definition is number two, and then so on. In the 1828 Webster's dictionary, regulate means to put in good order. And that implies, and then leave it the frick alone. And that's what the founding fathers meant. But yet people like Hamilton turned around and said, okay, we got this commerce clause. Which means we can regulate anything we want. And regulation apparently means, put burdensome hurdles to competition out there and tax and everything. And look at California now. Gas prices are $2 more a gallon. You can't start a company there. It's punitive how big it goes. And that's the slippery slope. Once you start to step outside the lane and get the government involved in the economy, it never stops. It'll keep on grabbing more and more power. And that's exactly what the Fabians wanted. And it's a direct confrontation of the founding ideals of this country.
And Shaw was very vocal over the common man could not self-govern, that they required intellectual masters to rule over the masses.
Central planning.
Yes.
That's just basically it.
Yeah.
Last guy we're going to touch on next week is Edward R. Peace, and he is a piece of work. As I said, he was the early historian of the Fabians, and very serious man, nice mustache. And he's an Englishman, and he got to live to be 97 years old too. A couple of these guys live to be old geezers. Do you want to comment any more on Peace, or do you want to sum it, or should we sum up today?
I think the only thing I would say is that he served as kind of a gatekeeper of their history by the fact that he was like the official. His actual job was secretary of the society, but he was responsible for documenting the official history he played a big role in all of the initial writings that went on. He was a big, big deal in the Fabian Society.
We got a little bit of time. I want to sidetrack a little bit because I got an interesting piece of literature came across my desk last week. And I could spend about 5 minutes on it if that's cool. And it's about socialism versus capitalism. Just to hammer this point home while we're on it. Give me 1 second, I'll pull it up.
Well, while you're pulling it up, I did want to mention one other guy. Where did he go? Are we going to cover Oliveira next week as well?
Yeah, we can.
Well, the reason why I wanted, just because he, again, is another person that was in civil service at the time. And he kind of served as you spell his last name Olivier. He kind of was the bridge between the more radical element that wanted faster change than the gradualist wanted. And I found it interesting that he becomes the governor of Jamaica, and Jamaica plays such a role in Gladio that I was fascinated, because we're also, you fast forward to more recent in the series I'm doing with Alpha, Permadex, the guy that founded Permadex, actually set up a secret intelligence organization in Jamaica. And Jamaica is basically full of these Fabians throughout their civil service as well. He also was one of the main authors of the original tracts. He also wrote in the Fabian essays for socialism. So he's definitely a big deal.
Okay. I got this email on this and downloaded it. This is a piece called The History of Socialism and Capitalism, written by Niall Ferguson and Victor Davis Hanson. It's an excerpt from the Human Prosperity Project at the Hoover Institution of Stanford University. It's a very credentialed paper, but these are pretty bright guys. See how much we agree with them. I'm just going to read a quick excerpt. We're talking about the pessimism of Joseph Schumpeter. You can look him up on your own. He says Schumpeter was pessimistic. He says, "Can capitalism survive?" He asked in his book Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy from 1942. His answer was stark: "No, I do not think it can." He then posed and answered a second question: "Can socialism work?" Of course it can. Perhaps the Austrian economist's pessimism was simply the effect of teaching at Harvard. By temperament, a conservative who was hostile to the New Deal and allergic to Keynesianism, Schumpeter gradually tired of the cocoon on the banks of the Charles and came very close to moving to Yale on the eve of World War II. Yet Schumpeter offered 4 plausible reasons for believing that socialism's prospects would be brighter than capitalism's in the second half of the 20th century, even if he signaled his strong preference for capitalism in his ironical discussion of socialism. First, he suggested capitalism's greatest strength, its propensity for creative destruction, is also a source of weakness. Disruption may be the process that clears out the obsolescent and fosters the advent of the new, but precisely for that reason, it can never be universally loved. Second, capitalism itself tends towards oligopoly, which is an issue, by the way, not perfect competition. The more concentrated economic power becomes, the harder it is to legitimize the system, especially in America, where big business tends to get confused with monopoly. Third, capitalism creates, educates, and subsidizes a vested interest in social unrest, namely intellectuals. Here was the influence of Harvard. Schumpeter knew where he spoke. Finally, Schumpeter noted, socialism is politically irresistible to bureaucrats and democratic politicians. These guys are criticizing his work, but he really summed up, it's very accurate what he's saying here.
Yes.
And we go on. This is a great piece. You guys can all download this for free at the Hoover Institute. But I thought that, was a nice little icing on what we've been talking about today.
Yeah. So as a transition to our future shows, I did want to close with a little excerpt that I found. It's jumping forward, but it kind of is going to set the tone for the rest of, because it features Sidney and Beatrice Webb. Did you know that in the middle of the famine in the Soviet Union, that Sidney and Beatrice traveled to Stalin's Soviet Union, and they returned home and produced a 1,200-page love letter of the Bolshevik regime, praising how well it had been doing for all of those years. This was produced in 1932. It was a 2-volume book called The Soviet Communism, A New Civilization, ? That was published in 1935. It was notorious for its intellectual blindness of what was going on in the Soviet Union. They spent 2 months on a tour of the Soviet Union during the middle of the famine, and they claim to have seen a new civilization, not the totalitarian nightmare that was actually going on, and characterized it as superior to anything the West could offer. They insisted there was no forced labor anywhere in the Soviet Union, there was no famine going on, and that the secret police existed only to protect the people, not the government. It said that all unemployment had been abolished. Well, that's true because it was forced labor. They also said that all of the trials that were conducted by the government were free and fair from a legalistic standpoint. They characterized the planners as wise and benevolent, and that it was more of a true democracy than anything the West could come up with.
It's amazing to me that you could go visit the Soviet Union and have praises for it, because their centrally planned economy resulted in the Holodomor, where tens of millions of Russians,
that's when they were there,
starved to death.
Yes.
And they're singing its praises as their people are dying of famine. Now,
Yes.
it's the greatest example of why central planning doesn't work, because the farmers didn't know how much to, what to grow, how much to grow. The state told them, and the result was tens of millions of people dead. That's
Yes.
central planning for you right there.
But these are the eugenicists people. They literally don't care.
Globo homo.
Yep. Well, that does it for today. So you want to give them a sneak preview of where we're going next week? We're going to do a deep dive on
we're still with it. We're going to go into those 4.
Yes.
And the week after that would be an entire week on London School of Economics, and then we'll just keep going. Then we'll keep going forward chronologically. And speaking of people who visited the Soviet Union, we will be spending some time on Thomas Dewey as well. Another Fabian who was unfortunately have his fingerprints all over today's life.
Yes, he does.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I really appreciate it. Great to see you out there in the chat, and we'll catch you next Friday at noon. Do you have anything coming up, Warhamster, you want to share with anybody?
Just still going on Wednesdays. I'm still going through on my Federalist report with Doug Gibbs. We're going through Madison's notes on the Philadelphia Convention. We're 23 weeks into that, and probably got another 30 weeks to go. But if you really ever want to understand the original intent of the Founding Fathers, that's the series to watch. I mean, binge watch it, start to finish, and it's long and arduous task to get through it, but it is worth it. You will never not know original intent again. And
it's good for homeschoolers. What time's that on?
I do. I'm not doing it live right yet.
Okay.
So I usually post it on Wednesday afternoon. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, I highly recommend it, especially if you guys are homeschooling. It's the perfect thing to be able to do a long series of what our country was actually set up to do. And
you'll walk away from it not only with a dislike of Alexander Hamilton, which is automatic when I talk, but also, it's you'll get sick to your stomach, or not sick to your stomach, but you get really upset of how quickly that we, it was before the ink was even dry on the Constitution, did we start violating it. And, one of the fun, I'll go ahead and throw this out there as a little educational tidbit. The very first bill the U.S. Senate ever proposed, U.S. Senate Bill 1, was the Judiciary Act of 1789. And in that, they had a clause that allowed the federal courts you could appeal to federal courts on state-related matters. And that was not part of the original intent. In fact, that was proposed in Philadelphia. It was shot down. It was argued in the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, and we were assured that would not happen. State courts were handling state issues. Federal courts would handle federal issues. They were co-equal. And the U.S. Senate, their very first bit of business was to toss that out and federalize the court system. Think about how much different our country would be today if that was not the case.
Yep. So, that's all the stuff that you can learn.
And that's because they were statists. They were Fabian Socialists, not in name only, but the same ideas. They wanted centrally planned economies. In their days, they wanted federally funded internal improvements, which of course means take tax dollars from you and me and give it to their crony capitalist buddies so they can make more money. And that is socialism right there.
Yep. All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.